This is Yesterzine, the show that takes the mic and mechanics approach to old gaming magazines. A reference that is chronologically perfect for what we actually do. Namely, taking an old games magazine and playing the highest and lowest rated games to see how they stack up in 2020. And in the cover feature, we discover what the issue tells us about how we discovered and bought games when YouTube was just the answer to, how do I get to work in London? Returning to where we started this whole endeavour nearly a year ago, we open a copy of The One, originally a multi-format 16-bit magazine, but then an Amiga-specific tome, published by Golden Era magazine legends EMAP. Except, this time, it isn't. For this issue of The One, the 83rd, was published by Maverick Magazines instead, and there is absolutely a story there for the cover feature. In the meantime though, we've got a game to play. We're late in the Amiga's life by this point, it being August 1995, mere weeks before the UK launch of a little thing called the Sony PlayStation. Still, they managed to scratch up 6 games to review, albeit 2 of them were CD32 ports of games already in existence on standard Miggies. One of those is our gaming hell though, so we'll get there. But as for the heaven, some backstory.
Users lose all sense of reality and enter another world.
As mentioned, we're in 1995. The 16-bit era is very much coming to an end, and the floppy disk era of mainstream gaming likewise. Over on PC, Wolfenstein 3D is 3 years old, and the legendary Doom has been around for 18 months. Neither of those games initially made the Amiga, and owners were understandably jealous. Over the last few years of the Amiga's life, many tried to produce something that could compete, most notably Team 17 with their pair of attempts to drag their Alien Breed games into 3D. But this month in The One gave us the most overt attempt. Gloom. Yeah, Gloom. The phrase legally distinct is already warming up on the touchline, pausing only to look at this title screen and mentally downgrade the amount of money it thinks the lawyers are going to be able to charge for this one. Gloom is by Black Magic and written in late-era Hero Amiga language Blitz Basic, which was partly developed by Gloom lead programmer Mark Sibley. The most famous product of said language is this, seminal Amiga Racer Super Skid Marks, a game that suffered quite a common fate of Amiga games for me. The demo was so good, I never actually bought the whole thing. The theory was that Blitz was good enough that an Amiga 1200, or in this case the near hardware identical CD32, could do Doom. Gloom, theoretically, should be the proof. First major issue here for a modern first-person shooter player, no mouse option. But since it does support a CD32 joypad, even on an A1200, that's not a huge deal. You can play it on a one-button joystick, but you won't be able to strafe, and you'll quickly gather that you'll be dead, quicker than you can say, I'm gloomed. There never was a prayer this would work on a standard A500 or A600 Amiga, so we boot up a CD32 and, as you would do, leave the settings on default and hit start. It's not exactly high resolution, is it? There's an enemy there somewhere. We detect movement and run into the second major issue in 2020, those controls. We've got strafe on the shoulder buttons and only one working stick which operates what we used to call tank controls, namely forward, left and right. It's tricky to adjust to these days, and you'll notice many times in this capture where I've clearly hit the shoulder button in an attempt to fire. This first simple level just throws some soldiers at you, but even so, that's an impressive frame rate at least. It's very responsibly obeying my mistaken idiot control inputs. The One gave this 90%, but they weren't alone. Even the normally stingy Amiga PAM matched that score, albeit correctly admitting it's more Wolfenstein's level technically than it is Doom's, pointing out the disappointing different lasers only weapon selection. And despite everything I just said, there is a game here. Somewhere in my second hour playing it, it came close to clicking. I made at least some peace with the controls. I was getting far enough without dying to start finding weapon upgrades and health packs. I'm seeing at least some of the appeal AP and the One enjoyed 25 years ago. It does start adding a few new enemies. The most fearsome I encountered is this giant robot that demonstrates the slight problem that the enemies use the same weapon style you do, and thus firefights get quickly messy. He's satisfyingly tricky to kill without being a laser sponge, and I was getting the hang of hiding to make it all possible. The maps are pretty samey, with little variation in looks. This is mostly down to it being a game that fits on 2 floppy disks. The CD32 version uses less than half of 1% of the available space on the CD. Thus, there isn't a huge amount of room for textures, and as far as I got, they all rather look like this. It doesn't completely lack for tricks, making liberal use of switches to wall off levels, and stage set pieces, including this nightmare section a few levels in. Or this Wheel of Death a bit nearer the start. This could of course be even better on a faster Amiga. Amiga Power themselves mentioned it was super fast on an A4000 they borrowed from their sister title, Amiga Shopper. The thing is though, if you're going to run it on £1,500 of Amiga, why not run Doom on £1,500 of PC, where it would fly and look like this? More to the point, if you were prepared to wait 3 months, you could play this version of Doom on a PlayStation that costs less than a base Amiga 1200, much less that ninja bastard of an Amiga 4000. Still, if an Amiga 1200 you had, Gloom is what you had, and it did have options to be prettier. If you turn those on with your CD32, the most powerful thing I had easy access to, then you can up the resolution and increase the window size at least. Although obviously even on this first level you do pay the price in frame rate. I imagine this is the mode that Amiga Shopper's A4000 handled as well as the CD32 handled that migraine mode earlier. There was a remaster. A year or so later they released Gloom Deluxe that took more advantage of those massively quicker machines and managed to remove the reliance on the later Amiga-only AGA graphics mode. This meant you could actually play it on an Amiga 500, albeit only one with an expansion card to bump up both the CPU and RAM. None of the games focus mags reviewed it, but the 2 serious ones did, returning basically the same scores they gave Gloom, because it was the same game, with the ability to run a bit prettier. There was also a sequel as late as early 1998, titled Gloom 3 in deference to Deluxe being technically Gloom 2. CU Amiga weren't impressed, saying the best thing about the package is it included both versions of the original game on the CD at half the original price. Should you play Gloom in 2020? Well actually I'm going to say yes, but only if you have that base A1200 or CD32 and a semi-decent joypad. Playing it in its prettiest mode on something expensive is just going to make you want to play something that actually takes advantage of that power. But this is as good as 3D really gets on what you could just about call a standard Amiga, and if you can handle the controls, it's not that bad at all. But is it Doom on the Amiga? No. And to be honest, it's probably not even Wolfenstein. There's a happy ending to the tale though, because in late 1997 the source code to Doom was released by id, and enterprising Amiga coders did port a version of Doom to the Amiga, which, given sufficient power, looks like this. Predictably, you need something much quicker than an A1200 or CD32 to even run this thing though. Amiga Shopper at least would have had a new lunchtime distraction. You can't imagine it happening today really, but magazines changing hands wasn't actually that rare an occurrence during the Golden Age. Gaming magazine granddaddy CVG begun life at Lynne Publishing, today publishers of PC Pro and Computer Active, caterers to the exact opposite ends of the PC-owning audience. From there, it went to EMAP, erstwhile publishers of The One, and by the time it closed, was in the hands of Future Publishing, publishers of every gaming magazine that still exists in 2020. Even this show's favourite tome, Retro Gamer, has been through 3 publishers in its now 16-year run. There were various reasons for this, of course. Sometimes publishers felt they had a gap in their offering and just made an offer, which is why Your Sinclair moved to Future, who had backed the CPC alone in the 8-bit wars to that point. Sometimes a magazine was no longer profitable for the originating publisher, but someone else thought they could run it cheaper, and usually this was possible and magazines had a good extra life. The rest of the time you sold it to Maverick, the vampire publisher. Maverick had a reputation for buying magazines and taking the run it cheaper part of the process very much to heart. And to prove that, let's follow the story of the One from this, its first Maverick issue, to its sad demise. To do that though, we first reverse one issue back, to the 182, the last EMAP issue. In that, the current editor, Andy Nuttall, announced the closure of the magazine as the circulation wasn't enough for EMAP to keep it running in a world of 3 Amiga games magazines, but a rapidly declining Amiga. It's actually quite rare for a magazine to have time to do anything for its last issue. It's usually a very sudden decision. We'll look at more of that in a later show, but the One was at least one of the semi-lucky ones. They replaced their usual self-congratulatory strapline on the cover with, "This time next week, I'll be on the beach." The editor's letter is usually about the last thing to be written anyway. How can you talk about an issue without knowing what's actually in it, after all? So Andy Nuttall was indeed able to apologise for the closure with the One's later era traditional cry of Arse. He also let readers know that the game's coverage would be incorporated into sister serious title CU Amiga from now on. Given CU Amiga already covered games, this was clearly an excuse for EMAP to keep subscribers going, but with a subscription to that magazine instead. There are other references squeezed into the magazine. For a start, while Andy wrote his editor letter last, between going to press and the release of the magazine, the closure meant that a money-off deal on Super Street Fighter 2 couldn't happen, leading to a giant sticker clumsily dumped on page 8. There's a full obituary on page 12, involving several ex-staffers, including Dave Upchurch, editor of the issue we covered right back in our first episode. There's a 2-page ad for CU Amiga, making a brave attempt to push their gaming credentials, and a cringe-worthy, era-correct attempt to push the fact the magazine had babes. The first CU Amiga incorporating the One was August 1995's, and it duly featured a flash on the cover, the One deputy ed Matt Broughton's recruitment as games editor, and a tips section appearing, and a review of Sensible Golf, which the One had already done. Amiga Power paid what passed for a tribute, at least stretching to saying they would rather it was Amiga Action dying in the middle of ripping the One's final issue apart. Come September in CU Amiga though, and the flash was already gone, if you can even notice while staring at that cynical excuse for a cover. Matt Broughton was still games editor, but the One isn't mentioned. This issue is the reason for that. Maverick had bought the magazine, and issue 83 was there first. On the surface, not much has changed. The first Maverick issue has the same 84 pages as the last EMAP one. It doesn't take long to see the cracks though, even in digital issue form. Take this cover disc page for example. The text is notably larger and spaced out, resulting in a much lower word count. The writing too is immediately worse. Using Arse as the punchline for a good portion of jokes wasn't exactly Shakespeare. But the Maverick edition already feels like when the young kid in the office tries to join in with all the in-jokes without any idea of what made them work. They also somehow managed to use B4 as before. The news page celebrates the resurrection, even taking a swipe at the other magazines for reporting the death in the first place, and saying that's why you should buy this magazine for news. Slightly suspiciously, their glowing, but not quite as glowing as Gloom, review of the mail-order only game Timekeepers is accompanied by a form to order it direct. The cynical will not be surprised to learn they gave Timekeepers a higher score than any other magazine did, although not exactly by Rise of the Robots-like distances. Certainly though, no one else devoted 4 pages to it. They probably didn't devote 4 pages to an internal advert for a Liverpool FC yearbook either, or a full 8 pages to the laziest player's guide in recorded history. Although stay tuned. The magazine ends with that mainstay of cheap publishing, the recommended games section, using the exact same copy for each game as the last EMAP issue did, except somehow managing to not even copy-paste properly, and putting Cannon Fodder's description under PGA European Tour. They also stretched it from 2 to 4 pages. They did at least write a new intro, taking the brave approach of insulting their readers for playing video games. In trademark proofreading glory, the next month page promises in a font large enough to be your mum that the next month will feature the start of their new rewind feature. A shame really, since this first issue already includes said feature. You will not be shocked to know this issue is also the last to include that feature. The back page ad is, predictably, a 5th page devoted to that Liverpool yearbook. So not great, especially when you realise that there are only 6 games reviewed compared to 21 last issue. You have, unfortunately, seen nothing yet. This is that next issue, Maverick 2nd. Confusingly, it's reversed the 4p price increase from 3 issues earlier, but that might have something to do with the fact the magazine has already lost 20 pages, falling to 64 in total. That's the laziest cover in the history of laziness too, simply an advert for their free game. With the disc missing from the front, you might reasonably assume that the game they refer to is either Hollywood Hustler or the pinball game Obsession, those games in that screenshot. And so, you haven't really fully appreciated how this is going. Because it isn't. It's Flair's well-regarded little platform game Trolls, which Gary Whitta had given 80% a couple of years earlier. I'm showing you that earlier review here because here's the disc pages for it. Yeah, that's the screenshots for Hollywood Hustler and Obsession again. Note also the excellent disclaimer that they only have the English manual despite the unpatched game having a manual check that could come from any part of it. Their best advice is to turn it off and on again if it asks you for a word from a bit of the manual they didn't bother reprinting. The highest scoring game in issue 84 is Whiz at 87%, which the unnamed reviewer praises to the heavens with the conclusion,
"To be honest, this is really an average platform game."
If you saw the Rise of the Robots episode, you're probably already suspicious, and 2 more facts won't change that. Whiz is by Flair, the same people as cover disc freebie Trolls, and in fact had already been reviewed 8 months earlier in the one, getting 81%. With the trademark care of Maverick's the One, the reviewer admits to playing a foreign version minus several improvements made to the UK release. Also, if you check the sidebar, this game is apparently called Tower of Souls. To be fair though, so are Fears, TurboTrax, and Obsession Pinball too. Obsession Pinball also looks a lot like Hollywood Hustler. They're really getting mileage from those screenshots, aren't they? Without belabouring the point, let's skip to the end of the magazine, where there's the recommended section for August again apparently. That's awkward. For slightly confusing reasons, the back page advert is for CU Amiga, presumably part of the EMAP deal. You get the idea, so let's speed up a little. Issue 85 has another of Flair's games free, Dangerous Streets, which they at least managed to name on the cover, although their cartoony drawings don't exactly give an accurate impression of the real game. Neither does the Enthusiasm. This is a game the One had previously reviewed at 22% on CD32. Simon Byron's considered conclusion being,
"Why is a pile of crap like Dangerous Streets associated with the supposed future of gaming?"
It was actually included with CD32 hardware in a misguided policy of Commodore's, where they deliberately included crappy games in order to make people buy more new games. As opposed to people seeing Dangerous Streets running next to Sonic CD and flinging their money at Sega instead. This cover mount is of course the A500 version instead, which the One originally described as
the sheer awfulness of Dangerous Streets, but with more disk accessing and worse graphics.
Amiga Power incidentally gave it 2% less than they gave Rise of the Robots. Other highlights from issue 85 include them reviewing Hollywood Hustler, which their readers may find they're familiar with for some reason. Their proofreading did at least include making sure the screenshots were of the actual game, but didn't extend as far as getting the price right, quoting 2 different ones in the review. They spend 6 pages reviewing driving game Wheelspin, which no one remembers, but they might remember the magazine telling readers their A500 is poo, which is certainly one way to retain subscribers. They spend another 6 pages reviewing Exile, giving it the exact same score as Matt Broughton did over 2 pages 5 months earlier in the same magazine. The letters page is back thanks to the stacks of mail they've received. Not enough apparently to actually fill the page. Your graphic designer friends are already getting stress headaches just looking at this too. Also, it's now October in the recommended section, as they apologise for getting that one wrong. November gives away Winter Super Sports 92, again from Flair, shorn of its year to hide the age of the thing. I'm not saying this one is more obscure, but the one never reviewed it. It did get 61% from Amiga Power. Again, they've only printed the English manual due to lack of space, which is impressive since they somehow managed to wang on about the game for 8 pages. Incidentally, the reason I'm doing this badly in the footage is that they've somehow got the controls backwards. They also double down on insulting A500 owners, the vast majority of their audience, in both the Dungeon Master 2 and Pinball Mania reviews. Given Mania runs on the same engine as the seminal Pinball Fantasies, the fact it looks this ugly and can't run on an A500 is remarkable. Thinking about it, Spidersoft basically Maverick Magazines to that whole series. It is still October in the recommended section. December brings a new low somehow for the free game, being Baddiel and Skinner's Fantasy Football Manager, which only Amiga Format even bothered reviewing on original release, but Amiga Power had recently given a full 8% to on its budget re-release. They also take a break from insulting A500 owners in order to inform CD32 owners their machine is dead, and thus presumably they should stop buying a magazine for it. If you wanted the magazine put out of its misery, this is how you would go about it. For a third month, it's October in the recommended section, where they still apologise for the 2 months it spent being August. A further 8 pages are spent on a guide to Winter Super Sports, consisting almost entirely of screenshots. It's Christmas, and they're already giving away Hollywood Hustler. Good thing you didn't spend £25 on that 3 months earlier, isn't it? Also, I'm not sure it's possible to build a less attractive cover than this. The magazine is also halved in size to just 32 pages. It will not shock you to know that the recommended section is now a full 1/8 of the magazine, and it's still October. January comes, and we're not spending for full games here anymore. You have to make do with the demo of Hillsea Lido, a vaguely pleasant theme park-like game they gave 80% last issue and described as not as good as Theme Park. The disc page swerves this by saying they've been playing it all month and it gets better the more you play it, presumably in order to make you forget that part. Although, if that was the plan, then reprinting the last page of the review was probably an error. Lido is by the same team as Timekeepers, and again you can suspiciously order it through the magazine. Amiga Power, unsurprisingly, reviewed it 20% less, and even then they stated that score only applied if you lived in the real town of Hillsea. It is October for a 4th month. And with that we run out of issues anyone has ever scanned. By this point it's pretty clear no one is buying this in the shops, and they're doing just enough to not get sued by the subscribers whose money they have. We have evidence that it staggered on for 3 more issues, with games so thin on the ground that their cover feature for issue 91 is a guide to Dragonstone, a year-old game about which Cam Winstanley in Amiga Power said,
I hate this game totally.
The last one we know of is 92, by which point I'm told it had shrunk to just 16 pages. Presumably by then there were sufficiently few of the legacy EMAP version subscribers that they could just close the thing and walk away whistling. Maverick Magazines were notorious for this, having done the same to several other magazines, including Mega, an issue of which from happier times we looked at last season. The owner, Hugh Gollner, glossed over this in a later interview. When asked why Maverick closed, he suggested it was because
the console market used to go in big cycles, and we were a victim of one of those cycles.
And not, for instance, because they'd run out of zombie magazines to leech the life of, like some kind of magazine publishing vampire. Goldner had actually formed the publisher that begun Amiga Action before selling out to Europress, and would again somehow go on to work at EMAP briefly, leaving because
it was all running smoothly and reliably, which I wasn't used to.
Which I think rather says it all. And from what can only be described as magazine hell, over to our gaming hell. Publishers Rasputin were short-lived. Moby Games only lists them as ever publishing 3 games, 2 of which have CD32 versions covered in this very issue. Likewise, those represent 2 of the 3 games developers Shadow Software ever worked on. Jet Strike, a Wings of Fury style horizontal shooter game, earned a respectable 72% to get itself immunity from this section as the 2nd worst game in the issue. Our winner is thus this: Extreme Sports Sim Base Jumpers. To explain for those who aren't appropriately down with the kids, base jumping is one of the early manifestations of the kind of extreme idiocy that in 2020 would obviously have a large Red Bull logo attached to it. Basically, you jump off the top of a tall building and then leave it as long as possible to pull your parachute. If you thought skydiving was a bit brave, the death rate for base jumping is about 40 times that of jumping out of a plane. This is mainly because the average base jump is usually made from less than 1/3 the height a parachutist is legally required to open their chute. The fatality rate in the game is somewhat higher, mainly because what we have here is a game with a multiplayer option. In the game, 4 of you jump off the same building at the same time and have to race to the bottom. It's not even that simple too. You are actively incentivized to encourage doom for your cohorts by ramming them into the large number of flags and pipes that seem to stick an unreasonable distance out from the wall of these buildings. If you're one of the lucky survivors, then your job is to be the last to open your chute, thus becoming the first to land safely. But of course open it too late and you're going to be turned into chunky salsa, having not shed enough speed. This would be an excellent modern remake as a party game. In a world of gang beasts and duck game, this would be another slightly tipsy Saturday night argument. Or it would be, because there's another half to base jumpers. In order to get to the top of the building, you don't just ride the lift, you have to play this platform cum miner puzzle game. And it's not good. As you may already be able to detect, the controls aren't quite right for a start, with it all being too easy to miss ladders and platforms. This is only made worse by the frequent sections where the game adds to the already high peril by using scrolling to time you out, especially as there are sections where the only possible route up means going down first, which the game sometimes makes completely impossible, and hitting the bottom of the level penalises you first with a points loss, and then can actually end your game. It's not come up on Yesterzine yet, but people who know me may have heard me rant about supposed classic platform series Rick Dangerous before. I do this because it makes the cardinal sin of reducing an action game to guesswork. Rick deliberately hides peril for you. Sometimes falling off a ledge will insta-kill you, sometimes it won't. And identical switches can be required to finish a level or kill you. It's cheap, lazy difficulty, and unfortunately the constrained view of base jumpers means it suffers from exactly the same thing. You get to the bottom of multiple ladders where only one is the right answer, but unless you've memorised the level, there's no way to tell, and sometimes no way back when you get it wrong thanks to the previous issues with scrolling. It's just pointless, and to be honest, pretty much game-breaking, even if you were multiplayering it. You bought this game for base jumping, not average platforming, and given it's much quicker to go down than up, you'll spend most of your time doing the latter. A remake, please, with more to do while base jumping and the platform sections entirely disposed of somehow, perhaps by throwing them off some sort of building. As a bonus though, the One's legendary Maverick Publishing proofreading skills strike again. The review claims there isn't, and won't be, an Amiga 500 version. Which is interesting, because guess what you've been watching for the last several minutes? On the back page of Yesterzine this week is a very lovely glossy advert for James O'Grady on YouTube, the only man who can turn a ZX Spectrum game into a live-action feature film.
Hi, I'm Jarrett. I'm the pilot and leader of the party. I'm going to get you on your expedition, fly you over the Himalayas and get you home safe again. That's a promise. If anything goes wrong, I've got my revolver. So let's check the time. Oh damn it, watch has stopped. I'm sure we'll be fine. I'm sure we'll have enough fuel. So, let's take off.
Spectrum adventure games never seem so true to life. James's speciality is indeed Sir Clive's finest, and the kind of typing game we really should talk more about on this channel one of these days. James though doesn't just show you these long forgotten manually entered masterpieces, he plays them too, and when they have glaring obvious flaws,
90% return, which is fine, but also there was a wobble factor, which meant if you say I want 19% income tax, you would get plus or minus 3 to that, which made no sense. You want to reduce tax by a penny in the pound and end up increasing it by 3p in the pound, which is just stupid. So I changed that.
Yeah, he fixes them so they don't. If we may point you at a video, how about this on the rather interesting old Spectrum action adventure Treasure Island, a game that came free with your correspondent's first ever computer. You'll find James on YouTube, Twitter, and inside a mainframe. The first two might be most convenient. And that's about all we have magazine for this week. Do the YouTube things all the YouTubers ask you to do, like subscribing and drinking 8 glasses of water a day, and we'll see you back soon for another old magazine and another 2 games of debatable historical significance. Doodles!